Welcome to another Sales Wisdom Pod. We have Matthew Confer with us. He is a VP Strategy and Biz Dev at Abilitie. It's like an alt MBA if you want. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about podcasting as well because Matt has his own pod, leadership development, and so forth. This podcast has been brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast like this one. Podcasts are amazing. Podfire.com. Matt, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about Abilitie?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So based out of the Austin, Texas area, been in my current role for a little over 5 years now. Started my career at Deloitte Consulting, spent about 9 years there. Found my way to the world of learning and development and education, and it was definitely the best professional decision I ever made. So you mentioned in the intro, the name of our company is Abilitie, and basically we do leadership development via simulation-based training. So gamified leadership development. If anybody is familiar with the game SimCity or any of the Sims franchises, that's kind of usually our best way to describe the platform. How do you get people trained up to be leaders via gamified, immersive, simulation-based training?
So my question, I'm huge on education and probably reforming big ed as a system. I even want to start an online school for my kids. Is why don't we have people do practical stuff that will have them generate money instead of making simulations? Is it because they're like in a corporate business and don't have the actual means inside this business to do so? Is it their negative mindset and thinking they'll fail and they'll make a fool out of themselves? Like, why not throw them in the real simulation and have them make money out of their efforts?
It's an interesting perspective. The vast majority of our clients are large corporations that are looking to level up their leaders. So it's a little bit difficult for them to put those participants in a situation where they're generating revenue. For them, for most of the organizations that we work with, what they're trying to do is level up their leadership skills. So one of our platforms is built around how do you become a more effective manager? And a lot of organizations really struggle with that. People get promoted to the manager level, and they got promoted to the manager level because they're a really good individual contributor, not because they really have the skills, the wherewithal, or the knowledge and what it takes to be a good manager. So that's really where we come in, giving the managers an opportunity to practice in a safe, simulated environment that gets at some of the real world challenges that you have as a people manager.
Can you give me an example of that? Let's take a startup one, because I'm not the corporate type, but let's say I'm part of a startup. I'm actually the CEO of a startup, fintech SaaS, let's call it that. What kind of simulations could you put me into to grow my leadership skills?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the people management simulation, but potentially a better option for the situation that you just described is we have a simulation built around financial acumen. So how do you actually understand how a business makes money? And a good deal of startup founders maybe didn't come from a traditional business background. They might not know what a balance sheet is or what an income statement is or how you calculate the profit and loss of a business. And so one of our most popular simulations is a gamified way to teach people the financial statements, teach people how a company makes money, teach people what the difference between, revenue and profit and those types of really critical skills when you're running a business.
How can this alt education intertwine with my actual work and can make me do more cash almost instantly because you take like 10, 12 hours of my time per week, you said, right? That could be equated to, let's call it 10 to 12K. Plus I'm going to need to pay for the MBA. How could I get like my ROI as fast as possible?
Yeah, so a little point of clarification, the vast majority of our programs are about 2 to 4 hours per week. So we've tried to work with organizations and with individuals. So we have both open enrollment programs, and then we have what we call closed cohort programs. So closed cohort would be a company comes to us, they have 40 high potential leaders that they want to put through a program. We put them in a closed program. Open enrollment would be you or one of your listeners who's interested comes directly to us and they sign up for a program and they go through it with people from all around the world. And our focus is, how do you give 70% of what a solid business school education is, at about 10% of the cost and at about 10% of the time. So if you decide to go back to school to get your full-time MBA, it's a wonderful investment, and I think you would get a lot of return on it. However, it's going to cost potentially hundreds of thousands of US dollars, and it's potentially going to cost you 2 years of your time. There are many companies like ours who are trying to say there are some critical skills you can get in 2 to 4 hours a week. Our approach to that is, how do you gamify it and how do you make it a little bit more fun and interactive?
So gamification, do you have examples of that? I mean, I've been a gamer pretty much my whole life, was addicted to World of Warcraft, was the best player on my server, was the best at Call of Duty. And I recently sold my Switch because I found it would bring my brain to places I didn't want it to go. And I'm trying to replace that lack of gamification, the real one, by making my whole business a game, so that when I open my computer, it's all fun and I can generate serotonin every time I'm seeing cash in my Stripe account. So how can you do that with an MBA?
Yeah, so I think financial acumen is a good topic to touch here. You can learn what a balance sheet is by reading it in a textbook, or you can learn what an income statement is by clicking through an online training. Our perspective is, a better way to learn what an income statement is to play a game where you're actually building a business from the ground up in a simulated world, but you're competing with other people. So the big unlock that we had was, how do you make it competitive, but how do you make it immersive and interactive? So if you and I are on separate teams in our financial acumen simulation, we're building a business from the ground up, which means we're setting prices, we're setting payment terms, we're building factories or we're leasing factories. These are all decisions that you make in the game with consequences. What's great about it is, though, at the end of every round, we see in real time how each team has performed. So we actually get to see that your team dropped your price, which meant that your customer rating went up. My team decided to raise our price and go for a high margin, and maybe our profit went up, but our market share went down. So we're actually learning key financial concepts by actually competing and gamifying the learning process.
And do your students make bet on the side with real money?
That has not happened. Maybe it has, and we're just not aware. Thankfully, we have had the pleasure of delivering our simulation in 30 countries around the world. We've had 100,000 participants go through one of our simulations. And so I'm guessing there has probably potentially been wagers on the side, but I have not been aware of it, nor do we encourage that.
Gamblers like me would probably make side bets. So when you say 10% of the price, are you referring to 2 to 3K per cohort per person?
Yeah, our 12-week MBA is right around 2,000 US dollars.
Nice.
And so our corporate clients, we have some organizations who might put hundreds to thousands of people through the program. So they obviously pay a different price than that. But our standard price for our 12-week mini MBA that you can find on our website for our open enrollment is right around $2,000.
That's pretty cool. A lot of orgs, they think of LinkedIn Learning, I guess, as a low-hanging fruit. Do you also have like a video class component and homework that you give? Like, what's the curriculum?
Yeah, so we actually don't. Our perspective is that LinkedIn Learning does, and there are other platforms like it, does a really wonderful job of getting you this unbelievable course where you can take classes on hundreds of different topics on LinkedIn, and you do everything on your own time and you get up to speed on any topic that you want. We're trying to carve, and successfully thus far, carving out a different lane for ourselves. It's synchronous learning with other people that is focused on one specific topic, where you're kind of immersed in that topic for a given amount of time. Whereas LinkedIn Learning is on your own time, you dive into the topic you want. We will get you to become a much better people manager, but you will do it with other individuals synchronously in a competitive simulation.
So who's your ICP precisely, and how do you reach out to them?
Most of our buyers are learning and development leaders, so HR leaders at organizations, usually Fortune, call it 1,000 companies. As I mentioned, we tend to do some work with fast-growing startups and have a decent amount of experience in the tech space, but the bulk of our clients tend to be at Fortune 1000 companies. They tend to be HR or learning and development or talent development leaders. So they tend to be the individuals at an organization that are tasked with leveling up the organization and making sure that the leaders and future leaders at the organization have the skills necessary to be successful.
So if I have my alt MBA company, could I just like cold email my way through these people using Apollo and tools like that?
Yeah, we have historically found that the best way to sell in our industry is to actually give people the chance to experience it. So cold outreach works for us. It has worked for us in the past. What has actually been more successful is interactive demos and actually what we call play sessions, which are basically ways for our potential buyers to experience the product for themselves. You and I have talked here for a little bit, and it is a fun product. I'm very proud of our product, but it's something that you kind of need to experience. There aren't a lot of people at organizations that we work with that feel comfortable putting 500 of their top leaders through a program unless they've experienced it themselves. So we're an experiential learning company. We also believe that our buyers need to experience our product before they would ever put people through it.
So what you mean by that is that you'd have like 3 leaders at $2K a pop each signing up their first deal, and after they have been through it, they would recommend it to the rest of the org.
Yeah, yes, and sometimes we're actually picking specific people at an organization to go through at a heavily discounted price. So if we're working with a new client that has never worked with us before, there are many opportunities for us to actually give them a free seat or a discounted seat to actually test the program out.
And the demo wouldn't necessarily be about the ROI, but the actual experience and the wow of going through a gamification and putting smiles on faces and getting like, wow, that was really cool, sort of. That's your KPI.
Yeah, the interesting thing is you called it out and said, wow, that tends to be what sells our product. We're proud of the learning. We're proud of the debriefs. We're proud of the facilitators. Normally, when somebody comes to work with us, it's because they're disappointed with the leadership training that they've done in the past, and they're looking for something that has a little bit of a more of a wow factor. I think we've all sat through trainings and webinars and conversations where it's been a little bit disappointing. Our goal is to make it so everybody is engaged in the whole process and kind of start there and then see what learning we can do in the process.
Yeah, something refreshing, something new. I think there's a lot of old people in that industry that just do things the old school way. And even if their training is actually good, it's just the front end of that, like not another of these training. All you need is to have like one bad experience. And as soon as the brain tags that with like these outdated front end with no branding and no real moat or unique selling proposition or product innovation, I think people get quite discouraged by that. I wouldn't say the word MBA has a negative connotation. I'm quite critical of like words and their meaning and products. It doesn't have that connotation, but I feel in some ways it could have. At the beginning of this pod, I mentioned that, yeah, some MBAs, they're known to cost a lot and be sort of to buy the book. It's also a huge risk, right? Like I was listening to you mention multiples of hundreds of dollars. I mean, that's a big risk for something you're not sure that's going to pay off, and certainly going to look good down in your LinkedIn if people scroll down to there, but you never know. I want to take these last few minutes, talk about your pod. Why did you started your pods? What were your goals? Did you reach these goals with your own podcast?
The goal was we felt like we had a lot of people in our network that were doing interesting work in our field, and they either didn't have an avenue to talk about it, or we weren't being associated with them and weren't given the credit for the work that we were doing. We were proud of the 100,000 people who had gone through our simulations, but we're still a relatively unknown company. We're growing, and we've almost tripled in size over the last couple of years, but we're still relatively unknown. And the podcast was just one way of getting our name out there a little bit. I think we had the benefit of we had a lot of people that were interested in being on the show. So I've had the chance to talk to CEOs of major companies. I've had the chance to talk to researchers at universities who do work on what does it mean to run an effective meeting, or how do you actually do effective public speaking. So I've had a lot of fun with it, being the interviewer on the other side, but it's also for our company been a good way for us to be able to promote some of the interesting people, some of our interesting facilitators, and some of the people in our network.
Got any leads out of it?
We've actually found a couple of people who, when they reach out to us on our website asking for a demo, they say that the first thing they found was the Learn to Lead podcast, which is our podcast. So it is not our number one lead source. Probably going to conferences and doing LinkedIn posts are probably still our number one lead source. But probably in the top 10 is people who found us via the podcast. And for us, the podcast is relatively inexpensive, isn't a lot of work on the back end. We put out 2 shows every month. It's something that we can curate and we can talk to interesting people, and the lift has been pretty much a net positive from the start, and we've released, I think, over 100 episodes at this point.
How can a podcast host ask better questions?
I one of the things that I liked was about this show is we got to chat for a little bit beforehand. What I've had a lot of success with is bringing people on the show who it's not my first conversation with them. I think the way that you become a better host is you actually get to know your guests a little bit before the recording starts. I've found that is probably the most successful thing. I find something when an individual says something to me before we hit record, and I'm able to ask them about that when the camera is recording. I think that adds a lot to the value of the show.
Right. I mean, you have your own pod, so like the pre-convo wasn't that helpful, but for most, I think it is, especially if it's their first time. Most people have the notion that you're different on and off camera. I think you've seen that, or I've seen in you that you were pretty much the same, like pre-recording. I don't think that's the norm, though. I think people, quite change, like flip a switch or something. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I get a lot of people that are nervous, and don't share any good information. And I'm not sure what to do in these cases other than probably not publish the pods, but it's like 5% of the times. I guess it's part of the rules of the game here. Want to ask, like, again, for the podcast, like, how do you actually select your guests and filter them and make sure that they're fits?
Originally, when we first launched the show, we made a big list of people in our network that we thought would be interesting to be on the show. And we reached out to all of them. And of the maybe 30 or 40 people we reached out to, probably 20 or 25 of them said yes. So that was our first 20 to 25 shows. Once you get a little bit of traction, we found that a lot of people reach out to us. And so we try to record shows in advance so that we have 2 to 3 months of content. And we're hoping for guests who have evergreen content. So if you're a professor at a university and you've done work about studying the effectiveness of meetings, leaders all around the world are interested in that, but it doesn't need to be released in October or December or February. We can release it at any time and it has value. So our goal is, how do we find guests that have value that isn't time sensitive? We want topics that are a little bit more evergreen.
Right. Well, Matt, thank you so much for the value shared today. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is probably the best. So Matthew Confer on LinkedIn. The podcast is called Learn to Lead. The company is Abilitie. That's Abilitie. And if you are interested, I was able to do a TEDx talk in 2019 about decision making. So you can search my name, and it's based on some of the work that we've done with the thousands of people who have gone through our simulation. So the talk is called Before You Decide.
Love it. And I am Charles, your host of Sales Wisdom Pod. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to podwire.com.